Okay, so I would like to ask our second question. How can we raise awareness of each other's work for more inclusive architecture history and archives collections in relation to diverse women architects? Mary, what would you like to say?
All right, well, thank you again. And thank you for all of the wonderful responses of my fellow panelists to the first question. I think we're all in agreement that archives must become inclusive in terms of race, class, and gender identities, but they also need to collect the representative as well as the exceptional. The local and the regional must also have a place in the archive. As my colleague Jorge Regal says, the center can often be seen with greater clarity and greater criticality from the edges. The acquisition, organization, and accessibilities of collections can enable us to understand design, as Heather and Jessica have mentioned, as a collaborative process across people and disciplines and spaces. Opened in 2015, the CEPT Archives of Modern Architecture, Planning, and Design is part of one of India's leading schools of design. Some of CEPT's materials are beginning to form constellations rather than simply collections of singular stars. Ishita Shah was the CEPT archivist and curator who acquired the papers of architect and designer Hema Sankalia, who is one of India's first women architects. She was also a designer, so she worked at many different scales. Sankalia was also a close collaborator of Charles Correa. Now, while the Correa papers are at the Royal Institute of British Architects and also at his own foundation in Goa, any institution or individual can subscribe to his digitized papers through the foundation. And this is what the CEPT archives in Ahmedabad did. Now Sankalia's analog papers can be read in conjunction with Korea's digitized ones and vice versa. So it creates an ability to read across collections that are often siloed. Milka Bliznikov, architecture professor at Virginia Tech University, knew an archive would ensure that legacies of pioneering women would not be forgotten. In 1985, she founded the International Archive for Women Architects, the IAWA, at Virginia Tech. She assiduously collected the papers of not only pioneering designers, but also innovators in materials, technology, sustainability, management, history, conservation, and activism from across the world and across the centuries. Professor Donna Dunay, who is the current IAWA director, has expanded the archive's reach and scope with her seminal Peace Project, which was launched in 2018. Thus, any woman anywhere in the world can donate what she considers a seminal drawing or design to what is now an open archive for the representative as well as the exceptional woman at the International Archives of Women Architects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Heather, what would you like to say about our second question?
Yeah, I want to build on what Mary mentioned about these sort of collecting networks, right? I think all of us in collecting institutions are used to this idea of sort of knowing who the players are and finding the stories and then going after, going after those collections. And at the Architectural Archives, we're doing that. We have, collections related to the Philadelphia School, Lou Kahn, Venturi Scott Brown, Mitchell Jurgala, and we're, those are the big players. We have them, they're solidified. We've spent many years building relationships with those firms, people who worked within those firms over many years. And it's helped us discover these sort of concentric, other concentric circles within those networks to really represent not just, as Mary was saying, these sort of, top level people who are thinking archivally about their stuff already, but also maybe the people who were there on the scene and are contributing to the built environment in interesting ways, but who maybe haven't thought about where their collection might go, or just looking at their stuff in a historic way like that. I think it's essential that archivists and users of archives understand the nature of the work of one another. We spent a lot of time with the patrons in our reading room, understanding what it is they're working on and guiding them through the collection. And in return, I always feel a little bit of a responsibility to explain sort of the practice of archives, how collections are developed, how they're brought in, how they're arranged. Surprisingly, people, especially students, are really interested in this. A lot of the questions sort of revolve around, well, how did this get here? Why is it arranged this way? Why are, some parts of the collection over here and others over here? So I think, part of our responsibility is to just, educate people about those practices, and also to allow feedback to us about how people are using our materials. I think we all need to be invested, regardless of our field of archives or architectural history. We all need to be invested in the work of engaging underrepresented communities within our respective fields. I see that as a core responsibility of making sure that colleagues I'm working with have different voices and are contributing to our work in that way. And I think it's really important for archivists to be embedded in the education of architecture and design students. We certainly have opportunities for that. We would love more opportunities for that. It always elicits really engaging conversation, and again, feeds back information to us about how current students are thinking about design, what kinds of questions they have. We spend a lot of time tailoring these tabletop tours that are now pretty much all virtual. We've adapted in that way. And it's just, it's the only way that we get this stuff out there in the world and are able to, to have these really important conversations with the youngest generation entering the profession.
Thank you, Heather. And Jessica?
Thank you. So as an archivist who works in an academic setting, I see my role in raising awareness of architectural historians' work really as supporting the architecture students that I interact with, both undergraduate and graduate, and the work that they produce. So I really strive to encourage and amplify their work, both in sort of like the traditional use of archival materials and the non-traditional. One example is that I served as a library advisor for an undergraduate architecture major who put together an exhibit on the first female graduates of the Yale School of Architecture. I'll be happy to find the link and put that in the chat later. And the second sort of slightly more nuanced way that I see my role is sort of what Heather just mentioned, and that's through my special collections instruction work. And in general, I work a lot with architecture students that are in the theory, history, and criticism track of either the architecture major or from the Masters of Environmental Design program, which is very research oriented. So I'm working primarily with students that are going to go on in their careers to produce research and projects in architectural and design history. So in my instruction sessions, I talk a lot about silences in the archives, right, which we kind of touched on in the first question. We talk a lot about who's represented, who's not, what voices and perspectives are there, what voices and perspectives are not. And I talk to students about what we can learn from those silences. And for architectural collections specifically, this is very useful when consulting the archives of a large firm or of a singular architect. For example, I've used construction drawings to talk about the labor that goes into the actual construction of a building and the laborers that are doing the actual construction work, which is a perspective that goes beyond just looking at, Eero Saarinen's beautiful, humongous design development drawings, right? And then, I really like how Mary put this, really talking to students about how we can read across collections and read against the archival grain, and how we can take different context clues to really like build our understanding, right, of where the hidden voices are, where those silences are, and what we can learn from them. So I sort of see my role of raising awareness of what's going on with architectural history as from where the students are at in their education, right where they're at their point of need.
Thank you, Jessica. And Marcela?
Yes. Let's say that I have the feeling, being the last, I mean, always in the panel, that we share a lot of ideas, and for major institution who have archive, and as the one where I'm working now, I think that at least I see myself, it's essential to have a stronger presence outside the walls of our archival walls. And as we say, we need to start up to begin a professional interaction with women who design and other communities. Students are in a way an important component, but let's also go out into the world. And I noticed that for me, it's crucial to go and meet the women in their own environment, in their work environment, and to engage with active and diverse group and welcome them to gain a presence inside the institution, so that the institution is not in the archive a separate entity. In this way, it's not only a way to increase the inclusivity, but also to start to break some barriers between the top, the institution, and the lower presence. I noticed, this is my experience, that how sometimes women architects, younger, sometimes, I mean, mid-career even, they are often intimidated by the power of an institution. And one strategy that I'm adopting is to allow the young professional to gain awareness about the importance of the archive as a testimony of their own work and their own legacy. And so to educate them to create their own archive. And under this perspective, it's essential to support the production, for instance, of architectural monograph, exhibition, and when possible, also to offer new digital platform to increase the voices to be widely spread. I mean, we talk about cross collection, but also we need to to increase the voices at a very wide territory. And I want also to finally to touch upon what I see as a change in the profession. I worked for more than 2 decades in a NGO, non-profit organization for the documentation and conservation of modern heritage. And it's clear to me that now are the women becoming the leader in the process of development of conservation processes. And I'm now working in the acquisition of a women archive, and she has been the first, I mean, in Los Angeles, in charge of conservation of very important landmark in downtown LA. And recently I asked her, why and when did you start? I mean, why you took this specific field of the profession? And she very bluntly and very clearly answered my question and said, when I began, I mean, in the late 70s, my colleague, the architects, were not interested in this job offers. They thought this was not a creative process. This is not architecture. It's nothing more than redecorating of adding wallpaper. We know that the profession is very different. And when I see the list of her successful projects, I mean, it's absolutely impressive. And so I think, I mean, the Bradbury building, a few of that, Bradbury building, Griffith Auditorium, the LA Town Hall. I mean, for people who have an awareness of Los Angeles, they know this is important. So we also have to discover in the profession where are the niches, where the women are really the principal and really the relevant.